So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are at the African Futures Dissemination Workshop here to look at the work that our 10 African Futures scholars have done over the past year here at MSU as part of the African Futures Research Leadership Program. For those who don't know me, my name is Justin Rabinaugh. I am a program manager with the Alliance for African Partnership based in the East Lansing office. So before we get started with the program, I just wanted to make a quick note. We will have interpretation available. So if you would prefer to hear today's session in French, there is an interpretation tab at the bottom of your screen. Just go ahead and choose the French channel, and then you should be set. We will also have a recording of today's today's workshop. So keep an eye out for that email. I will share that with everyone within a few days after today's session. So let me quickly go over the agenda. We have a packed schedule today, so we have a lot of content to get through, so we'll try and keep it quick, keep it brief. We've grouped up our scholars by topic area. So we have agri-food systems, water, energy and environment, education and youth empowerment, and health and nutrition. And we will just give a quick overview of our scholars, and then we will hear some opening words from our Africa Office Director, Dr. Richard Mkondiweri. So I'm sure everyone here knows at least one of these faces. These are our African Future Scholars, our third cohort. They've been with us at MSU since last August, I believe, and will be heading home shortly. So they are going to talk about their year here at MSU and all of the work that they've done with their mentors. But before we hear from them, let's just hear a quick word from Dr. Richard Mkondiweri. Richard?
Well, thank you very much, Justin. Good afternoon, colleagues from Africa, and good morning to colleagues at MSU. My name is Richard Mkondiweri, the Africa Director for the Alliance for African Partnership. And I would like to welcome you on behalf of management. I'd like to say that, yet again, we have this event, which from AAP's side, we regard it as a landmark event where AAP, as well as Michigan State University, we're not only talking, but also we are walking the talk of building a critical mass of young women researchers and scholars. These scholars represent diverse disciplines. They've undergone a one-year mentorship program at MSU. As researchers and scholars in their own right, they have not only gained new research skills and made contributions in advancing scholarly work, but also they have imparted new scholastic thinking to their own mentors. Allow me to thank the mentors at MSU and also from the respective partnering, AAP institutions. I would like to thank you for your commitment and support of the mentees. Allow me also, I think, to thank my two co-directors, Dr. Jose Malete Jackson, as well as Dr. Amy Jameson, for their unwavering support of this important AAP flagship program. We see you as mentees on this program as AAP ambassadors that will remain connected to our growing network of partners across Africa, and would like to assure you that we stand ready to join you in expanding your work, including exploring opportunities for future joint funding of your work. So rest assured that this is just a beginning of you being a part of the AAP movement across Africa. And we look forward to a productive webinar, and we trust that we will all enjoy your presentations. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Richard. All right, and before we dive into our presentations, I did want to mention that we will be having Q&A after each grouping. So I mentioned those 4 groups earlier. We're going to have a brief Q&A facilitated by Dr. Amy Jameson, who is AAB co-director, after each session. So if you have any questions during any of the presentations, please just put them in the Q&A section or in the chat. We will compile those questions and answer them at those designated times. And without further ado, let's get to our first group. So our first group is Agri-Food Systems. In this group, we've got Dr. Semeni Ngozi and Dr. Jessica Kampanji-Piri. And I believe we're starting with Semeni. Yep. Dr. Ngozi is with the Department of Agricultural, Food, and Resource Economics while here at MSU. She is working under Dr. David Shirley in that department. And her home institution mentor at the University of Dar es Salaam is Dr. Robert Katakiro. So Semeni, if you are ready, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Semeni Ngozi. I'll be presenting a project with the title of Patterns and Drivers of Food Purchases, the case of fortified food products in urban and peri-urban Kenya. Next slide, please. So background information of this project, what we are saying here is globally, the market for fortified food products is expected to grow at the annual rate of 5.3%. On the same note, the demand for fortified food products is also anticipated to increase due to different reasons, and some of them include health benefits associated with the consumption of fortified food products, but also because of the increased awareness in terms of nutrition needs among the consumers, especially the consumers within urban areas. However, the government of Kenya has been implementing large-scale food fortification programs as a strategy to promote, the intake of different micronutrients intake among the populations. As a result, the National Food Security and Nutrition Policy of Kenya mandated to do fortifications of different food products that include edible oils, maize flour, and wheat flour. Next. Though the largest scale food fortification programs in Kenya is mandated, little is known about the rate at which, people do purchase fortified food products, but also we do not know the rate at which people do consume fortified food products. It has also been noted that the fortified food products are not consumed by all, especially among people from rural and semi-rural areas. Furthermore, fortified food products are understood to be very expensive, more expensive than the unfortified products, hence making it, difficult for people to afford, especially people from rural areas. As a result, many consumers prefer buying unfortified food products from local maize or even milling their own, maize flour from maize grains. Therefore, this project aims at determining the patterns and drivers of fortified food products within urban and peri-urban areas of Kenya, especially, Nairobi and Kisumu are the most, largest cities within Kenya. Next slide. So the significance of this study actually is anticipated to have 2 contributions. The first one is the contribution to the body of knowledge. So we are saying that most studies and fortified food products that have been conducted in Kenya focused on individual products such as sugar or maize flour. Therefore, our study actually is going to take a broader view with the consideration of the 3 major fortified food products, which is maize flour, wheat flour, and edible oil. On the other hand, this study is going to have an implication in terms of policy implications, in terms of how policies can be refined to increase, the impact of Kenya's large-scale food fortification program, especially in peri-urban and rural areas, because those are the areas that we have very low intake in terms of the fortified food products. But also, this study is going to have a practical insight, especially on the companies that are getting involved in the production of the fortified food products. But also, we are saying that this study is going to provide, insights to the company involved in the marketing of fortified food product, but also it's going to raise a demand in terms of, making people buy more fortified food products, especially in rural areas. Next slide, please. Now, materials and methods. So we are saying that, in terms of data collection procedures, we use a multi-stage sampling technique to come up with the 4 regions, that is Nairobi urban, Nairobi peri-urban, Kisumu urban and Kisumu peri-urban. But also we use the random sampling technique to come up with 1,507 households to get involved in this study. Also, we employed a census to get data from the food outlet that we are selling fortified food products within the home food environment. Then finally, we used a structured questionnaire to collect data from a household, but also to collect data from the food outlet that we are selling fortified food products within the home food environment. In terms of method of data analysis, we use descriptive statistics to determine the patterns of fortified food purchases, but also we use the econometric model, especially the probing model, to determine the factor that might influence the purchases of the fortified food products within Kisumu and Nairobi. Next slide. Now, results and discussions. So table 1 shows the viability of fortified food products within the home food environment. As you can see from the table, we have two main factors. We have the proportion of the household that we're purchasing fortified food products, but also we have the average number of outlets within the home food environment. So when you look at the first factor, which is the proportion of the household that reported, they did have, the food outlet that we are selling fortified food products. Almost all the household within Nairobi and Kisumu reported that they had, food outlets selling fortified food products. As you can see, we have 100% for the fortified maize flour, 100% for the fortified wheat flour, and 99% for the fortified edible oil. But then when you do a comparison across the regions, we are seeing that Kisumu peri-urban actually had the least, proportion of the household that had food outlet that we are selling fortified food products within the home food environment. Now, then when we look at the average number of food outlet that we are selling fortified food products, we are seeing that on average, actually, they had 40, food outlets selling fortified food products for maize, then 37 for wheat flour, then 32 for edible oil. Then when we do comparison across the regions, we are seeing that Nairobi urban had the highest number of food outlets selling fortified food products, with Kisumu peri-urban having the least number of food outlets selling fortified food products. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the sources of fortified food products, we are seeing that, from panel 1 that represent the sources of maize flour, both fortified and unfortified, we are seeing that the major sources of maize flour is, a supermarket, which is small and large, but also duka, that's the traditional small, shop, but also, a posho mill. So generally, household within Nairobi and Kisumu did purchase fortified and unfortified maize flour from supermarkets, posho mill, and duka. But then we look at the wheat flour, we are seeing that, household mostly purchased wheat flour, both fortified and unfortified, from supermarket and duka. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the relative prices for the major fortified and unfortified food products, when we do a comparison across the product, we are seeing that, a household, we are purchasing actually fortified edible oil at the highest price. But then when you do across the regions, we are seeing that Kisumu, which is Kisumu peri-urban and urban, they're purchasing the edible oil at the highest price. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the proportion of the fortified food purchases, we are seeing that, 78% of the household within Kisumu and Nairobi reported that they were purchasing any of the fortified product, being it maize flour, wheat flour, or edible oil. But also when we do a comparison across the region, we are seeing that 82% of the household within Nairobi urban were purchasing any of the fortified product. But then when you look at Kisumu urban, it has the least, proportional, smallest proportion of the household purchasing any of the fortified product. Sorry?
2 minutes, Amini.
Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of the main distance traveled commuted by the consumers to purchase the fortified, wheat flour, maize flour, and edible oil, we are seeing that, Kisumu peri-urban, a household from Kisumu peri-urban, we are commuted the longest distance in terms of purchasing fortified food products. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the drivers of fortified food purchases, we are saying that we have 4 factors that significantly, affect the purchases of the fortified food products. That include gender of the shoppers, region that is in Kisumu peri-urban and Kisumu urban, but also the neighborhood wealth quartile 4, that is the high income quartile. Next slide, please. So in terms of the key takeaway that we are getting from this presentation, that the major, sources of the fortified food products are duka, supermarket, and posho mill. But also in terms of the availability of the food outlets, we are seeing that, the household in Kisumu and Nairobi had the food outlet for the fortified food products. But then in terms of the relative prices, we are seeing that Nairobi and Kisumu, household from Nairobi and Kisumu purchased edible oil at the highest prices. Next slide, please. So in terms of the distance commuted to purchase fortified food products, we are saying that household in Kisumu peri-urban actually commuted the longest distance to get the fortified food products. The next slide, please. Now, in terms of the drivers of the purchase, we are seeing that the household with female as a main shopper are more likely to purchase fortified food products than the household with male as a main shopper. But also we are seeing that household in Kisumu urban and peri-urban are less likely to purchase fortified food products than the household within Nairobi urban. Then high-income neighborhood wealth quartile are less likely to purchase fortified food product than the low-income neighborhood wealth quartile. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge my mentors, Professor David Sharif from MSU, then Dr. Katikilo from University of Dar es Salaam, then University of Dar es Salaam, then AAP for funding this program, Michigan State University, especially the Department of Agriculture, Food and Resource Economics for hosting me, but also the Food Security Global, Professor Maiwishi, Dr. Ayala, Ian, and Nayan. Asanteni kwa kunisikiliza.
Great, thank you so much, Samini. So let me switch gears here. Next up on our list is Dr. Jessica Kampanji-Piri. Jessica is from the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Her MSU mentor in the Department of Community Sustainability is Dr. Kim Chung, and her home institution mentor is Dr. Agnes Monguela. So Jessica, are you ready to go?
Yeah, thank you, Justin, for the introduction. Let me share my screen. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My topic today is the role of inclusivity in agri-food systems, lessons from low-income settings. And I'm going to feature 3 projects that I've been working with my mentors here at MSU, as well as my home mentor. And 2 of which are ongoing projects. And that is the first one being inclusive cowpea breeding, under the Center of Innovation for Crop Improvement in East and Southern Africa, in short called CCESA. And another one is prioritizing options for women empowerment and resilient in food tree value chains in Malawi, in short, the POWER project. While the third one that I've worked with mostly with my MSU mentor is the Feed the Futures, helping address rural vulnerabilities and ecosystem sustainability in Cambodia, in short, Harvest project. Just to give you a context, like any other low-income countries, Malawi is one of the poorest countries, where more than 80% of its population depend on agricultural livelihoods, of which women are the majority of such population. Being dependent on rain-fed agriculture also means that its economy is prone to frequent floods and agricultural calamities, and that women are still facing economic and political hardships and lack necessary influence on critical decisions that affect their day-to-day livelihoods due to unequal access to some of the productive resources such as land, inputs, and economic rigor. This is a context in which most of the projects are being developed from, and I'll give a snapshot of all these projects that I've mentioned, just to give an overview of each of them, and then I'll draw conclusion by drawing the lessons learned through engaging in these projects. So to start with, the CSR project is one of the Feed the Future's Innovation Lab for Crop Improvement that is in different countries, one of which is our CCSR is in Malawi, Mozambique, and Tanzania, and is concentrated on improving cowpea productivity in Malawi, Mozambique, and Tanzania. The main goal of CCSR is to produce cowpea varieties that are consumer preferred, market driven, gender and youth inclusive, as well as resilient to climate change traits. All this to improve food and nutrition security within the smallholder livelihoods that we are working with. A snapshot of findings on this project is that we found out that through a comprehensive gender sensitive value chain analysis, as well as the formative studies, context matters in that whether in matrilineal and patrilineal settings of Malawi, the northern part of it has more land than the southern part of the region. As such, how the varieties of cowpea were selected, whether they were intercropped with other crops or they were sole cropped, was dependent on what sort of settings where these crops were being grown. Secondly, we also found out that the preferences were different by gender, where females were more receptive of traits that are more for consumption, while men and youth were more receptive of traits that were more demanding at the market. As such, we have developed product profiles, not only in Malawi that are addressing these issues, but also in our partner countries, Malawi, Tanzania, and Mozambique, where they are sensitive to the context as well as the needs of the people that we are working with. The second project is the Power Project that focused on diversifying smallholder farming systems by scaling up the production and marketing of high-value food trees, such as mangoes, oranges, and as well as a macadamia nut value chain. These value chains were selected to boost and diversify smallholder incomes with the knowledge that tobacco, being one of our cash crops, is not viable as it used to be, and that also strengthening women's economic empowerment and reducing inter-household inequality. The approach that this project took was that the interventions were co-developed and tested with the farmers themselves, the fruit tree farmer themselves, and from there, we developed scalable interventions where we saw that macadamia nut was not a value chain to proceed with, because the farmers had mentioned that it was even more gender burdensome to women, and hence proceeded with the value chains of mangoes and oranges. And we took a further step in this project where we have now linked farmers to the market, where Malawi Mangoes has been an off-taker that is also linked internationally, is working with farmers through backing groups. And hence we have moved the market closer to the women, and hence they are now able to access and improve their incomes and provide meaningful engagement within the value chains that are involved. This also, we have gone further to produce guidelines, community trainings, as well as communication materials as outputs of these projects. All these were done to change attitudes and behaviors related to gender norms and power relations, and empower women at household, community, and institutional levels. Finally, but not least, the Harvest Project, which is a multi-sector project that was aimed at improving incomes and livelihoods of 7,000 households within 3 regions of Cambodia, was one project that we worked with my MSU mentor, and its goal was basically to develop agricultural value chains in rice, horticulture, and fish, and also providing support for sustainable resource management and climate adaptation, and strengthening the links between agriculture production and nutrition. The approach of this third project was different from the first 2 that have been featured, being that it was a nutrition agriculture programmed project, but also a multi-sector-wide approach project. Its focus was embedded in nutrition and health activities, where demonstrations, cooking demonstrations, and nutrition messages were being targeted to its targeted groups. Agriculture programming such as home gardening and fish pond management were also part of the interventions that were promoted in this project. All these were also done to improve nutrition and economic productivity. As I mentioned, the approach slightly differed from the two project features in that programming process for this harvest project was not as inclusive from local to local contexts and opinions, such that it was more a top-down approach where experts took their were imparting their expert knowledge to the communities that they were working with. And as such, the intervention outcomes resulted, some of which resulted that the interventions were not adopted, or there was continued resistance from the people that were part of the harvest project, especially the nutrition component of it. As a matter of progress through these projects that we've been working in, we have disseminated some of the results through the following outlets. For project 1, 2 articles have been submitted under inclusive cowpea breeding, and the presentation have been done in 2 EUC conferences. For project 2, we developed a research policy as well as the training materials, but also presentation in 2 critical forums like the UN high-level political forum and the Women Deliver conferences have been done. For the harvest project, article is underway, and to sum it all, we are having a chapter on food systems that is also to be submitted by end of September. As such, the lessons we are learning from all these in terms of approaches to do inclusive agro-food system is that for inclusive programming, be it in research, interventions, or any programmatic ends, context matters. Such one-size-fits-all interventions are proving to be getting resistance, as well as not addressing the heterogeneity needs that the different settings that we're working with have. As such, to solve these complex problems that our agro-food system are facing, interdisciplinary collaboration is key, as well as involving end users as key stakeholders is key. This involves flexibility and mutual respect of ideas. For also transformative gender to be achieved, there is a need to acknowledge equal participation of men, women, boys, and girls, where benefit sharing should be leveraged. This would include putting in place inclusive government structures where we promote local solutions and co-creation of problems with different stakeholders. Finally, and not last, the efficient use of resources and sustainability will be ensured by integrating research and development, adaptation to gender and local needs, as well as creation of an enabling environment where all the stakeholders from local to global are working together to address the complex problems that we are facing within our global food systems. I thank you for your attention, and I'm indebted to Alliance of African Partnership for these opportunities and for all the partners that have been part of the different projects that have been featured today, as well as my mentors, Dr. Kim Chung, as well as Dr. Agnes Manguera, for this wonderful experience. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a great presentation. Now, let me just switch gears here, and we'll be going into our first Q&A session. So this will be questions for Jessica and for Semeni both. We've compiled a few that have already been in the Q&A, but if you have any other questions for the two of them, please add those to that section now. And I will turn it over to Dr. Amy Jameson. Amy?
Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Jessica and Semeni, for those great presentations. We do have a couple of questions. So there's a first question for Semeni is, you mentioned that higher income households were less likely to purchase fortified foods. Do you know why that is? Is there a stigma around fortified foods?
Can I respond to this one, or
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll ask you one question, you respond, and we can move like
Okay,
that.
that's okay then. Thank you for that question. So we are saying that, actually it's a surprising result for us because we also expected that, when the household have higher income, also even their purchasing power increases, but then it wasn't like that. So that one has maybe it can be caused by different reasons. Some of them could be, instead of, because when the income of the household increases, we are talking about the rich people. So instead of them maybe depending on, for example, getting vitamin A from wheat flour or maize flour, maybe they're getting it from different sources. So that's why maybe they opted from not purchasing wheat flour or even maize flour. They go and purchase alternative sources of that fortified products, maybe sources of the vitamin A, for example. So that could be one of the reasons.
Great, thank you, Samini. Next, a question for Jessica on, are women involved in the production of high value food trees production, not the value added in Malawi? Hopefully you understand that question.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I understand the question correctly, but if it means like in terms of production for the value chains that we are involved, like mangoes, macadamia, and oranges in the regions that we were working with ICRAF, yes. There was an attempt of value chain addition where in one of the regions, there was an attempt to even put a food processing plant for the food trees that were being done in the northern region, but the that plant was closed because of the certification issues that the cooperative group faced. As such, the viable solution that we found was that they need a market where they can aggregate the food trees and the output that is coming from whether macadamia or the value chains that are involved, to be able to access markets beyond their reach, which would be now processed at another level of sophistication, that such as Malawi mangoes. I'll be more than happy to answer further questions if I have not addressed this question properly. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. So I have one more question for Samini, and then I think Samini and Jessica, if you look at the Q&A, you might be able to answer those while the other presenters are going, typing answers to those. But the other question is for Samini is, have you considered the risks of global NGO activists, especially from EU, evoke fears of fortified foods as causing major health risks for African consumers who might be prone to certain variations of cancers?
Yeah, thank you so much for such questions. That are great questions. Yes, we know for sure that we have some activities, especially from European countries, that saying that, for example, GMOs are not good. But then in Africa, actually, we have a big problem. We have, food insecurity, of which we want, actually to increase productivity so that we have more food and people can eat. But also we have other problems, such as the hidden hunger. We have micronutrient deficiency, and people need to get, more intake of this micronutrient deficiency. Take example of the salt. We have been using this salt that has been fortified with iron, and we don't have any problem, So I think, yes, we have these issues, but then I think it's a good thing to let people consume fortified food products, especially, the wheat flour, maize flour, because we have been consuming salt, which has been fortified with iodine, and we are good, but it's a good question. We'll have a look at it and have a broader view of it.
Thanks, Samini. And then an additional question for Jessica. I'm curious about the transregional comparisons, given that you've done work in Africa and you've also done this work in Cambodia. Are there some key areas where you see the opportunities for transregional research between Asian countries and African countries in the space that you're working?
Certainly, as I think my concluding slide is saying that there are both similarities and differences. Hence, what is most important is looking at the synergies on the issues that we are grappling with. For instance, issues of climate change, food insecurity in low-income setting countries. We are facing all these problems, but coming up with one-size-fits-all kind of solutions is what is problematic. But trying to find synergies where we are looking at a specific context and also a heterogeneity within those specific contexts, and now sharing what is working, what is not working is what we are learning from these type of trans-regional and trans-country type of projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to both of these presenters for a very informative presentation and Q&A session. I'll encourage them to look at the Q&A and answer those questions offline. But now I'll turn it back to Justin for the next session with panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy, and then thank you again, Jessica and Semeni. So as Amy said, if there's any additional questions that these two did not get to, please continue to put them in the Q&A. They'll be with us for the duration, and they should be able to answer them offline. So next, we are moving on to water, energy, and the environment. So we have three in this group. We've got Dr. Bulani Mswela, Dr. Lala Kunta, and Dr. Jamiat Nanteza. So first up, we will be hearing from Dr. Bulani Mswela. She is from the Department of Plant, Soil, and Microbial Sciences here at MSU, where she works under her mentor, Dr. Hui Lee. Back at the University of Botswana, her mentor is Dr. Kwinga Sishalongo. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Bulani. And I will turn it over to her.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Just a minor correction there. It's Kwinga with
Kwinga.
an E. Yeah.
Good to
And
know. Okay.
Sishalongo, you nailed it. So yeah. Right. I'll just share my slides. Right, I hope that is visible and that I'm audible. Good day, everyone. As said, my name is Bulani, and I'll be giving you a presentation, which is an overview of work that we're doing. We're looking at vegetables and ascertaining the contaminants that may be in our vegetables that were irrigated with treated effluent in Botswana. And this is all to work towards food security through safe food. We want to have enough food, but the food has to be healthy and free of contaminants. Now, food security has been mentioned even by the previous panelists. It's a global issue, and Botswana is no exception. The Global Food Security Index puts Botswana at 51%, and this is quite good when you compare to the regional average of 47%. But it falls short of the world average that is at 62%. So the government of Botswana is awake and aware of this and actively working towards this, and being self-sufficient with regards to vegetable production is one of the mechanisms that is being used. Now, there, however, is a bit of a problem here. Another problem, I mean, we have non-communicable diseases, and these cause about 46% of deaths in Botswana. This is too much. Most of these NCDs are hypertension, your type 2 diabetes, several cancers. This is so much of a concern that in 2021, the World Health Organization put together some experts to come and look at how they can prevent and control NCDs in Botswana. Not only because they're causing so much death, but because they're also costing the government about 13.2 billion pula annually. That is quite high. It's about 5.9% of our GDP. Apart from our NCDs, we also have, my slide will move, all right. We also have HIV/AIDS. This has been a global issue, and Botswana was hit quite hard. We still have about 20.8% of adults living with HIV in Botswana. We have new cases, around 2,200 new cases per year. That is really not good, but there's a glimmer of hope because of ARV, the adherence to ARV treatment, as well as a healthy lifestyle, which includes daily and consistent consumption of vegetables. So here we see vegetables helping us in terms of food security, dealing with NCDs and HIV/AIDS. Now, and these are quite good at doing it because we all know the benefits of vegetables. I won't even go into those, but there is a problem. Now, in Botswana, we are a semi-arid country, basically desert. We don't have a lot of water. So when government embarked on intensification of horticultural production, they then looked at the wastewater treatment plant in Gaborone as a source of water. Now, water that has been treated at this wastewater treatment plant is then used for vegetable production. The problem here is that when you treat this water, you don't remove all the contaminants, and those that remain in the water will go into the soil, accumulate. The vegetables, as they grow, will take these up, and we eat these vegetables. Right? So it is a problem because there are health implications when it comes to these contaminants. And today I'm presenting on heavy metals there, and some of these are carcinogenic, so they're cancer causing. So the aim of this work was to make sure we know the contaminants, the heavy metal concentrations in our vegetables, so that not that we stop growing the vegetables, but that we know how to manage our vegetables such that we have a healthy nation. Now, this work will provide knowledge, and one of the results that we really look forward to is to put forward a campaign so that we have a national pollutant monitoring program. So at any point in time, we know what's in our food and what people are being exposed to. Also to raise awareness in the public, especially the farmers and consumers as well, so they know the potential threats that are posed by such vegetables. So the study site is the Glen Valley Wastewater Treatment Plant. It releases water into the Notwane River. There's blue line all along. There are farms all around here, and they are really producing a lot of vegetables. These are the vegetables that we sampled, and this is some of the water that the farmers are using pumps to get from the river, right? And all along here, there are farms. Government is not just sitting, it's aware of the threats that are posed by treated effluent, and they have signs like this one that would say, do not wash your vegetables with this water, that would say only use drip irrigation, and our control is farms that are using borehole water. It's on the other, these farms are on the other end of Gaborone. Right, let's hope my slide moves. Okay, all right, so how did we do this? So we got soil samples from around the plants that I mentioned that we collected, and these were treated accordingly. The treatment would include drying them, sieving them, and also the vegetables were collected and processed accordingly. The heavy metals were then extracted using Aquariga and analyzed using MPAES, microwave plasma atomic emission spectroscopy. Now, what are the results? Before I mention the results, I should mention the hypothesis. And the hypothesis of this work, one of the hypotheses is that the heavy metals will be at a higher concentration in soil and vegetables that are irrigated using treated effluents versus those that are irrigated using borehole water. And indeed, that is what we saw coming through from all our results. Obviously, there's a bit of a difference in terms of the different heavy metals. I'll draw your attention to this graph here, because here it's quite prevalent. This is soil, and these are irrigated using borehole water, and you do see that the concentrations are way lower than those that were irrigated with treated effluent. Now, as I said, this trend prevails. We have spinach, we have rape. Rape is like kale. And out of all of this, what we found was that consistently soil and vegetables irrigated with treated effluent had higher concentrations than those irrigated with borehole water. We have heavy metal accumulation in soil. This has been addressed by other researchers, and they found the same thing. And the elevated concentrations in vegetables, we have more concentrations in vegetables than in the soil. And with spinach and kale having the highest, tomatoes had elevated selenium, and then okra had the lowest concentrations. Now, the interesting aspect is that the treated effluent was within the Botswana Bureau of Standards levels. So here the issue is not really the contaminants that come from the treated effluent, is them concentrating in the soil and the plants taking them up. Now, what next? Here I presented on heavy
2
metals,
minutes.
but we also will be looking at PFAS and pharmaceuticals and personal care products, and how the work will be disseminated, which is very important because we need government and stakeholders to know what is going on, such that we have concerted efforts. So all of those entities will be reached out to. We have already started disseminating some, or setting the tone for our dissemination, and there's this publication that was just accepted. So please do go in and read it, cite it, and share it with your networks as well. Right, and this work would not have been possible without the research assistant that is in Botswana, Mr. Innocent Ndaba, who was being supervised by Prof. Sichilongo to make sure that we get the work done. I am highly indebted to my mentors, Hueli and Kwenga Sichilongo. And again, I'd like to say thank you to Hue's research team at the Department of Plant, Soil and Microbial Sciences. I've learned a lot from all of them. And we'll continue collaborating and learning more from them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Pulani. That was great.
Thank you.
All right, now next up we have Dr. Lala Kunta. So Lala is at the Department of Integrative Biology here at MSU under her mentor, Dr. Phoebe Zarnetsky. And then at her home institution of Université Cheikh Anta Diop, she is under the mentorship of Dr. Amadou Guy. So Lala, if you could please share your presentation.
Thank you, Justin. Good day, everybody. I will just gonna share some result of one of my ongoing project here in Michigan State University in climate change, climate intervention, and mine heat wave. So since 1940, the average temperature have increased about 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. For some scientists, the global mean doesn't matter. But if you have some extreme event like heavy rainfall, heat wave, or a drought, it does and can have several impacts in the climate. If we just take an example for the July 2023 is the hottest month since we started recording data in the mid-18. The temperature increased about 1.5 degrees Celsius since 1940, and for the agreement in Paris, the target is about 1.5 degrees Celsius at the end of the century. It means that we already reached this target. We can also see that we have what we name some extreme event, and especially if in the ocean, this event can have some impact, like biodiversity loss, change in species behavior, some also economic impact when the fishery catch rate change, that can have some impact in some economic impact in some region like West African coast, one of the most productive system in the world, Peru, Chile, California, or Benguela. Here I just summarize some hottest extreme event in the ocean, what we name mine heat wave, and their possible impact they can have in ecology, but also in economy. So, okay, sorry. So the scientist community have some approach to try to mitigate the impact of climate change. One of these is what we name the climate intervention. The climate intervention is the approach where we try to mitigate the impact of climate change. For that, some strategy like modifying the solar radiation, or tining the cloud can reduce the impact, the rate of the temperature in the globally. But the problem is, has the Earth is the system. You have the ocean, the land, and also the atmosphere, and also other component. We unknown the impact that this climate intervention can have, especially in extreme event, but also in the biodiversity and ecology. Some study are already done, and climate intervention can, in the mean average, reduce the sea surface temperature globally. But we have some unknown question we will try to outline in this project. So the main objective of this project is what's gonna be the outcome of mine heat wave during climate intervention in the period 2035-2069. For that, we apply a methodology using 3 different climate scenarios. The first scenario is what we name SSP 2.5. It's related to the current rate of the trend of the sea surface temperature. In this scenario, the CO2 emission gonna increase before being to decline at the end of the century, at the end of this current century. This scenario is what we name middle of the route, because we're gonna progress toward a very slow sustainability with disparate development and incoming growth. Under this scenario, the temperature can rise about 2.7 at the end of the century. For this scenario, we have a very high challenge of adaptation and also a very high challenge of mitigation. The second scenario we will use here is what we name ARISE SAI 1.5, because it's the global mean surface temperature we want to keep at the end of the century. But if you remember, in our first figure, we see that for July, between 1940 and now, we already have this increase in terms of sea surface temperature. It's one of the target of the Paris Agreement, and it's a very high mitigation plan. The third scenario will be what we name ARISE MBC. It's based on cloud brining, when we will try to sit over 5% of the ocean surface to reduce the global mean surface temperature. It means that we want between 2015 and 2069 have the same global average of the temperature that this current period, like 2020 to 2039. Here we present the 3 anomaly, like in terms of temperature. When we try to look at the future, what we did is we take the mean values of the temperature for the current period, 2015 to 2030, 2045, and we do the difference between the future and the present period. For SSP 2.5, it's what we're gonna name the scenario with no climate intervention based on just the current situation. Our hypothesis is that if we do not mitigate, we will have an increase of extreme event related to the anomaly of sea surface temperature, and this anomaly can reach in some region 2 degrees Celsius. For one of the climate intervention scenario, like Arise 1.5, who have a target at about 1.5 degrees Celsius at the end of the century, we accept less event across the ocean, but some disparity, like in the Pacific Ocean, we accept more extreme event, but later than what we would have in a no mitigate scenario. The third scenario, marine cloud brining, is the most realistic for the community, but have a very high variability. We accept to have less marine heat wave in the Pacific with a very special variability. And for our approach, basic on these three scenarios, we already analyzed 4 metrics, what we name the frequency of extreme event in the ocean, number of extreme event over the year, the maximum intensity, like the temperature anomaly related to the seasonality, and also the duration, time between start and end date, and the 4th metric is what we name cumulative intensity. In terms of no-mitigate scenario, the ongoing scenario, beside any climate intervention, we accept more extreme event in the equatorial Pacific, but in terms of frequency, we can mitigate the frequency of extreme event in almost across the year. But we have to be aware that the first is for frequency, but in terms of duration, the extreme event gonna be longer, more than 20 days, 200 days, and also the cumulative intensity gonna increase. For the first climate intervention scenario, compared to the no climate intervention, Arise can considerably decrease the frequency of marine heat wave, this intensity, the duration, and also their cumulative intensity. Now, if we look at the third, for this climate intervention, we have more variability in terms of frequency of marine heat wave, maximum intensity, and for the duration, we
it's time.
More long duration. In conclusion, we evaluate the outcome of marine heat wave for our three scenario, and the takeaway is climate intervention would reduce extreme event globally compared to SSP 2.5. Thank you, and I want to acknowledge RP, Michigan State University, and also others collaborators who are involved in this study. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Lala. Now, next up, we are going to hear from Dr. Jamiat Nanteza. Dr. Nanteza is working under Dr. Yadu Pokral here at MSU in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. At her home institution of Makerere University, her mentor is Dr. Alex Nimusima. Jamiat, whenever you're ready.
So I believe all of us that are listening in have experienced drought in some form. So you've either been in a region where drought has happened, or you have read news about drought happening across the world, or you've seen some of these pictures on the internet, for example, the drought and associated fires in California, or Lake Mead being affected to significant reduction because of drought, or massive movement of people in Afghanistan as they move away from drought-stricken areas. Or you've seen pictures of people trekking long distances in search for water because their water sources have been affected by drought. Or you've seen some of these pictures, for example, in Kenya, of hopeless people looking on as their livestock get killed by drought. If not, you've been fronted by some messages, for example, from yours truly, that are seeking for support in donation for drought-stricken communities. And these other messages could be coming from humanitarian organizations like WFP and so many others. So I believe everybody in this meeting has heard about drought. You may be aware currently that there's a severe drought that's happening over the Horn of Africa. And these are the countries over the Horn of Africa as shown in this figure. It's been identified as the most severe drought in 70 years. And that means it's very, very huge in terms of impact. It has affected so many people. It has created water and food insecurity in the region and has forced migration of so many people in the area. But what is interesting when we look at this picture is, and by the way, where you see the brown colors, those are the countries that are in drought. So we see that drought has no political boundary or knows no political boundary. So we see drought cutting across so many areas. And why are we worried about this is because some of these countries are trade blocs. So we see exchange of goods and services across these countries. And when they all get affected by the drought at the same time, we are likely to have synchronous crop failures across the region, which would lead to actually food insecurity across the region that would stretch any adaptive capacity of the system very fast, or even stretch budgets of humanitarian organizations. So I picked interest in this region because it has frequent occurrence of drought. And so my name is Jamiat Nanteza, and I'm going to talk to you about compounding drought events over the Horn of Africa and their implications to the region's food security. And my mentors are Dr. Yadu Pokler and Dr. Alex Mimsini. What is drought? Simply think about it as a prolonged period of low precipitation. And when that happens, we get into what we call meteorological drought. And beyond that, we get into agricultural drought, which is really your soil now is lacking water that is enough to support plant growth. And beyond that, we get into what we call the hydrological drought, which is reductions in stream flow in the rivers or where your lakes will start reducing because there is a prolonged drought. And at the end of all these droughts, we do have social, economic, and environmental impacts. So how do we estimate drought? Simply, I'll make it simple for people. I think most of us here have visited doctors. And when you go in, they always check your blood pressure. And what are they looking for? They look for results that show whether it's above the normal or is it below the normal. And if it's above the normal, they say you have high blood pressure. So in terms of drought, that's what we do as well. So we look at deviations away from the normal. So if it's precipitation, are we seeing changes away from the normal? And like blood pressure, readings, which is, I think the normal for adults is 120/80, and it's standard across the globe. We also have standardized indices in drought. So this figure here is showing you what we mean when we say there's a standard drought. Whenever we hit a mark of -2 in terms of the index, that is an extreme drought, okay? And so these are the kind of indices we are looking out for. So the indices normally used as a standardized precipitation index or the soil moisture index and so on and so forth. And many people consider these different droughts separately, while others would consider them jointly. And considering them jointly is important because it gives us a bigger picture of what is happening. It's just like when the doctor takes your blood pressure reading, but also measure your temperature, or they'll draw some blood to check what is exactly happening. So when we consider them jointly, that's what we call a compound drought. And in this study, we considered both the meteorological and agricultural drought simultaneously. So the compound drought is defined when the meteorological drought occurs simultaneously with the agricultural drought. And the data used is soil moisture data and precipitation data. So we use model data from an EasyMap project for the period 1901 to 2019. So some of the results here, I'm showing you a time series of a 12-month average of our indices now. And remember, I showed you where we were. So whenever we hit, for example, the -2 index here, that is an extreme drought. So there's this drought here, which you see that happened over a selected basin in the study area. And you can also see the duration this drought took. So this one took like 3 years. So those are the things we start looking out for. And we do have some research questions, which I'll present as I present the results. And one of them is, what kind of compound meteorological agricultural events are common and where in the Horn of Africa? So I'm showing you a figure here. And by the way, in this presentation, whenever you see red, that's danger. So it's more drought or it's a drought. And so what we see are monthly averages of the number of times our drought index is less than the -1.5 mark for a 3-month drought. So what you see here, for example, in February is not just February results, but an average of December, January, and February. And we are seeing that most of the droughts in the region are dry to wet season, because this December, January, February is not a rainfall season for most of the countries, but the rainfall season starts in March. So we are seeing droughts that start in the December, January, February season transitioning into the March, which is actually a growing season. And that is a problem because that will affect crop production. So as we monitor droughts in this region, it's important that we start looking back even in the dry season to see if they're going below average. And whenever that happens, we are likely to have an effect on our growing season period. And the other way to look at it is just to look at changes over time. So here I'm presenting to you a figure that shows a change across decades. And so what you see as 1931, 1960 is a percentage change in the number of times we are hitting the -1.5 index compared to the previous 30-year period, which is 1901, 1930. And on record, that period, 1931, 1960, actually experienced more drought across the globe. The 1961, 1990 period has less droughts, as you see, but we are seeing that in the recent period, we are seeing more droughts coming up. And one may say, okay, why are we worried? We are worried because in this current period, there are more people than there used to be in the 1931, 1960, which means the effect is more significant, or the impact is more. We could look at the trends as well. And again, red is bad. In this case, we are seeing that countries across Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya have had increases in drought, which are significant, as you see. So those plus signs indicate areas where the impact is significant. The other question is, can we have propagation, in terms of drought? And I'm presenting to you a short video here. And again, look out for the reds. Remember, people who track hurricanes, they look out for the eye, but here we are looking out for the areas where there are more reds. So we see this drought moving through the season, and then we can start attaching months, lag times on that. So we can actually draw lines where it started and where it ended. And this particular drought took about 9 to 10 months for it to move from Somalia all the way to Kenya. So this gives some people a preparation period if we can get that information out to them. Lastly, what are the implications to food security? This is really work in progress, and we are presenting this in terms of economic food security. And the question we are really asking is there any signal in terms of prices that we see in drought? So this is a figure that shows you the producer price, and this is over Kenya and for beans and maize. And down below, we have the time series of drought. So we can start seeing periods of drought that lead to spikes in food, and that one. And so this is an issue. What you see here as a trend, whenever we have a shift, it's being caused by a drought. And we start getting shifts and new normals, which never go back to the original. And so with time, the food price will go high and certain people may not be able to afford them, and that affects their food security. I can give myself as an example.
It's time, Gemma.
Back then we could afford, beef easily, but these days it's quite expensive. So what are we saying in this study? We are saying that can we actually start using the food prices at different markets? So these dots in this video are showing you different markets and how the prices, for example, of maize is changing across time. So can we combine food price information and drought information to predict possible changes in food prices ahead of the drought, and be able to tell people, hey, your maize is going to increase, by this much in the next few months. So with that, I would like to say thank you to AAP for the opportunity and to my mentors for the support, and to everybody for listening in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamia. Right, so we are at our next Q&A session for the Water, Energy, and the Environment group. That's Pulani, Lala, and Jamiat. So if there are any questions for the three of them, please put them in the Q&A if you've not already. And I will turn it over again to Dr. Amy Jameson.
Thank you, and I want to thank our presenters for very informative presentations. We have a few questions. The first one is to Pulani. Are you aware of a billboard dehumidifier implemented in South Africa to deliver safe, pure water for residents to wash vegetables in and use in cooking? And maybe speak about, those types of interventions for the challenges that you're highlighting here.
Thank you so much for that question and the information. I actually was not aware of it, but it's such a good intervention. Actually, some things that I have not presented here is that we have work that is currently going on. And here we are trying to sort of come up with something similar. And what we're doing is we're saying, before the treated effluent is released into the river so that the farmers can use it, can we have more treatment of this so that we remove contaminants? So we are trying to use ozonation as well as a local plant. It's called prosopis secanana in the local language. It grows in the Kalahari Desert and it's a nuisance environmentally. So what we're trying to do is, can't we use this to further remove contaminants from our water so that when the farmers use it, it's safer? So indeed, this is in line with making sure that when the water gets to the user, the risks are really reduced to a point where they can even manage them. And I like the fact that they're also doing this for cooking with that water, So I'll surely look out for it and see what we can learn in Botswana and add on to the further treatment or tertiary treatment of our wastewater.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maswela. Now we go to Lala. Question for you. Given the severity of the climate change, of the climate crisis and the potential global impact of employing climate intervention, are any governments or regional bodies seriously considering utilizing the methods that you outlined?
Sorry, I can't start my video. Can you please, Justin, just try to, okay.
Sure, let me see. There you go.
So, can you repeat the question, Amy? I don't see it.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, no, it's in the, it wasn't posed in the Q&A, it came from another source, but given the severity of the climate crisis and the potential global impact of employing climate intervention, are any governments or regional bodies seriously considering utilizing the methods that you outlined? So how is your work, sort of, is it being taken up by any governing bodies or policymakers?
Okay, just to clarify, if you see the climate intervention period gonna be about 2035 to 2069, because we have very many unknown about the impact. Climate intervention is like as human being, we will impact in the normal variability of the Earth, and as it's the system, it can have many influence. For now, the two climate intervention scenario we have proposed it is about marine cloud brining. We will try to reduce the power that the cloud can have to increase the sea surface temperature, or also modify the solar radiation by increase the rate of solar radiation reflecting, can have some impact. So that's why we want, before deploying this scenario, in 10 years or more, be aware about all the impact implication they can have. So that's why we try to, the first publication was about how climate intervention gonna reduce the temperature. We have some information that it can decrease the global mean, but as I said, for some climate scientists, the mean doesn't matter. What matter is extreme event, and extreme event, has Jamiat say, has also say, can have implication in the ocean, in the continent, and in all the Earth. So that's why we want to be aware about all the implication climate intervention can have before the deployment, and the start of the deployment gonna be in almost 10 years. So I think I think that I answer the question. So for now, we don't have any application for the climate intervention.
Thanks, Dr. Kunta. Appreciate that. And next for Jamiat, we have one question about, it says your work is on quantifying drought is excellent. I understand it is not the primary focus of your work, but have you identified any potential water management strategies to maximize the water available? This could be for agriculture, domestic, or municipal applications.
Great question. Thank you so much. And I would say really water management is at the lower end, because we do not have, for example, if you talk of municipal applications, we do not have many of the communities connected to municipal, water. And the few that are connected, I mean, in some countries, there are water treatment plants that, recycle this water and probably use it for agriculture, but it's still, on a small scale. And quite frankly, that's not part of the work that I'm doing, but yeah, some of those things exist, but on a small scale.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, we will move on, and I thank Dr. Nanteza, I thank Dr. Kunta and Dr. Masuela for their presentations. And feel free to continue to pose questions for them in the Q&A feature, and they can reply to those offline. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Amy. All right. Next up, we will hear from our group on education and youth empowerment. So we have two of our scholars in this group, Dr. Khadija Kone from ULSHB in Mali, and Dr. Anastasia Mamabolo from UP in South Africa. So first we'll hear from Dr. Kone. She is working in the Department of Linguistics, Languages and Cultures under Dr. Paula Winky here at MSU. And her home institution mentor is Dr. Fatoumata Keita. So Khadija, over to you.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being online. This morning you have heard about climate, about agriculture, about food security. Now it's a high time we change the research paradigm. And now we're going to talk about languages, education. But today, I'm not going to tell you how many languages exist in the world, but I'm going to talk about assessment and motivation. And I have been working on this topic with Professor Paula Winky for a few months, and today I'm going to present the finding of one of our articles. Do directed motivational current phenomena exist everywhere? An investigation into African EFL learners' experiences. You know, English as a foreign language context is nearly absent in the global research, and that's why today I'm going to talk about this. But before I present you my results, I would like to define the major concepts in my research. Performance-based assessment. You know, performance-based assessment is this type of assessment which gives learners the opportunities to perform the skills that the test raters or the teachers would like to evaluate. For example, if you would like to know if your students can order food in a restaurant in English, the best way to do that is to design activities that will require them to go to a restaurant and then order foods. And while they are doing these real life situation activities, you observe them and then you grade them as a teacher. And based on this, you know, you can give constructive feedback to the learners that they can use to improve the processes of teaching and learning English. And concerning directed motivational current theory, those are like intense, exceptional, and unique motivational feelings that we can experience. And based on prior studies, this type of motivation can help language learners achieve some of their learning goals. And I'm gonna give you now a concrete example. Imagine you're a language learner from Mali, and it's your dream to work for Microsoft. And then there was a grant of Microsoft, you applied, and then you are selected. And you have to fly to the USA like in 9 months to carry on your studies, and after your studies, work for Microsoft. And there is a condition. You have to be proficient in English. You have to be able to carry out academic work in English, like presentations, writing scientific articles. And Microsoft told you, if you cannot be proficient in English in 6 months, they will give the grant to another student. Believe me, a student in such a situation, if it's your most important and your most significant dream to work for Microsoft, you will be motivated in a way that you will be learning English day and nights, and you will create your own opportunities to communicate with proficient speakers in English. And while you're experiencing this sort of motivational feelings, we call this directed motivational currents. And we language teachers, we came to the conclusion that if we can generate this into our language classrooms, it can be a good way for our language learners to become proficient in English and then to interact in English, because the ultimate goal of learning a language is to communicate in that language. And now I'm gonna be talking about my motives for this study. You know, based on prior studies, specifically one by myself, performance-based assessment can give learners the opportunities to evaluate the processes of teaching and learning. It's also increased their autonomy, their motivational levels. And, you know, another factor is that we don't have a lot of research on my context. I mean, West African English as a foreign language context, specifically French-speaking Africa. And it was my goal to include my learners' voices into this global research and then advocate for changes based on scientific evidence. That means the result of this study, in particularly investigate the impact of performance-based assessment on Malian English as a foreign language learner's motivation. To achieve this goal, I have come up with 2 research questions which can be, you know, combined into one. What are Malian EFL learners' motivational responses to an integrated multimedia oral presentation project used as a performance-based assessment tool? Can they experience directed motivational currents while working on these projects? But before telling you about my research methods, I would like to give you, some explanations about integrated multimedia oral presentation projects. This project was framed with a project template suggested by Dornier and colleagues. Based on this template, when you design a project, you can use a framework called Dissemination. And Dissemination means that the teacher come up with a project with which learners can identify themselves. And based on this, I have come up with the topics of security and peace. Security and peace are national issues in Mali because my country has been facing terrorism and security issues since 2012. So it was my duty to bring these political topics into my language classroom. And while my learners are learning English, we will be talking about this important issue to them, but we will be doing this into English. And to showcase, their product, I have organized a final oral presentation day. I have invited students' parents, my own colleagues, and all those people interested in that. And students use posters, they have used blogs on Facebook, PowerPoint presentation to showcase their product. And we called it Dissemination, because that project is something important to my learners. It's a part of their own country issues. And to achieve this goal, I have used the following research materials. I have been working with 100 participants coming from different universities, different fields, and this study is a mixed method study based on multiple case study design with 2 motivational questionnaires, one before they start working on the project to measure their motivational levels. And when they were done presenting their project, I have also administered another questionnaire to them. And I have also used interviews with my focal participants and learner diaries. Those are qualitative research methods that really help me go inside my data and then get, real data from my participants. Based on juries, I can capture parts of learning that I cannot do with questionnaires. So I have also used that project I have just been talking about, and I have analyzed my data using thematic analysis proposed by Brown and Clarkey, but I have done it manually this time. I have not used MaxQDA, although I could do that. I have also used SPSS, specifically descriptive statistic and inferential statistic. But today, because of time constraint and space limitation, I'm just going to present you part of my qualitative findings. And, based on the result of the studies, my learners have experienced exceptional, unique motivational feelings similar to DMCs in many ways. And they could also set goals for their English learning because I could provide them with constructive feedback, and they could establish routines such as, attending American cultural clubs in order to be able to practice English. And I could also share the workload of assessment with my learners because based on performance-based assessment, you can design checklists, you can design self-assessment tools that learner can use to self-assess and then ease my labor as a teacher. And, based on this study, we have come up with the following conclusions. And learners experience group-directed motivational currents, and the face validity of this type of assessment was very high because learners participated in the processes of grading, learning, and assessment was part of their learning in this case, and they enjoy it, although it's sometimes difficult to say that an assessment can be an enjoyment, but sometimes it can be. And the goals of assessment were very congruent with my learners' particular needs to communicate in English while performing some real life, activities such as, designing peace messages and communicating these messages to a real audience. And now, before I give the floor to the organizers, I would like to talk about my future directions. That means conducting a larger studies with participants from each corner of West African countries, and then experiment other project framework, and then use narrative and interviews. And I would like to acknowledge those who have helped me achieve my goals. my home country university, my beautiful mentors, Professor Winky and Fatumata. You know, you have transformed my life into something positive I will never forget about. My beautiful cohorts and my late brother, Amzata. You know, you are a good brother, and may your soul rest in peace, Amza. I wish you were here today to attend this presentation, but God has decided otherwise, Amzata. And rest in peace, Hamza, my little dude. And those interested in reading my paper, you can scan the QR codes, or you can just copy paste the link. And thank you, my beautiful audience. Yeah, now the floor back to you, Jasim.
Thank you so much, Khadija. So next we will hear from Dr. Anastasia Mamabolo. She is in the Department of Management at the Broad College of Business here at MSU. Her MSU mentor is Dr. Jerry McNamara, and her mentor at the University of Pretoria is Dr. Helena Bernard. So Anastasia, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Justin. Please confirm if you can hear me.
Yep.
All right, and let's see if you can see my presentation.
Yep, looks good. Thanks.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking your time to listen to our presentations and the work that we've been doing over the last 10 months or so. Every day we get to hear about entrepreneurs, and I think we know one or two entrepreneurs who are busy with their business ventures. And we've heard about how entrepreneurship contributes significantly to economic growth. So this makes entrepreneurship an important topic to engage with on a daily basis. So this is the inspiration for our study, where we looked at the institutional arrangements in underdeveloped entrepreneurial ecosystems. So this project is part of a bigger project. So we just took a portion of it and developed a paper from it. So we are looking at the two concepts, which are institutional arrangements and ecosystems. And our context of the research is Sub-Saharan Africa, and I've been privileged to be mentored by Jerry and Helena. So let me just start by defining my key terms so that you follow through my presentation. And I'm borrowing from Lala's slide on the ecosystem, so where she showed how the different organisms, these are plants, these are animals, and the whole ecosystem are hosted in one environment. So when we talk about ecosystem from biology, so we're looking at how different organisms work together or they stay together in a particular environment. And we have borrowed this concept from our wonderful scientists who've already presented and translated that into an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So when we talk about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, we are looking at the different elements that really work together to support entrepreneurs to engage in their activities. And those could be the networks that people formulate to run their businesses, the formal institutions. We have talent. So talent looks at the human resource that is available to support entrepreneurs. We have culture as an important element that supports entrepreneurship. For example, in some cultures, they don't support entrepreneurial activities, while other cultures, they promote entrepreneurship. We're looking at infrastructure. This is the availability of roads to support entrepreneurs when they move their goods from one place to the other. Market access, can they take those wonderful agri-products that my fellow colleagues have spoken about into the market? Do we have money to support entrepreneurs when they start their businesses? And do we have the right leadership in place to support all these entrepreneurial activities? And lastly, do our universities empower entrepreneurs or our students to be entrepreneurial when they leave universities? Do they look at entrepreneurship as an option for career? So in simple terms, an ecosystem, we are looking at a set of independent actors, how different people within our day-to-day engagement support entrepreneurship. And these people can enable or disable entrepreneurship. So the focus of my presentation is not the entire ecosystem, but I'm really looking at the institutional arrangements. And when I talk about institutional arrangements, I talk about the formal institutions and the informal institutions. So the informal institutions is the culture that support entrepreneurship, and while formal institutions looks at the regulations that are there to support entrepreneurship. Do we have the right policies in place to support the work that is being done by the entrepreneurs? So we are basically looking at within the sub-Saharan ecosystem, do we have the relevant policies? We have the relevant regulations that support entrepreneurship. So the motivation of this study emerges from the notion that the existing policies do not adequately support entrepreneurs. So we have institutions that enable or also disable entrepreneurs. So if we have regulations around maybe taxes that do not support entrepreneurs, so the entrepreneurs will not be able to engage in entrepreneurial activities. And to those of you who are interested in research from the scholarship perspective, so this is influenced by the fact that we don't really know the state of these regulations and the development and what are the mechanisms in which people compensate for the weaknesses in this institutional arrangements within the ecosystem. So when people are working together and if they see that things don't work out well, what is it that they actually do? So the existing literature does not clearly explain that. And of course, we are influenced by the social context. So the existing studies, they don't really show regional analysis and case comparisons, especially in the African context where most of the studies are from the developed countries. So we are using sub-Saharan Africa as a research context. And this really matters because we know we have resource scarcity. So a lot of entrepreneurs cannot access resources and there is uncertainty in the environment. So there's so many fluctuations within the business environment. And this really made the context important for this study. And our research question was to really look at the state of the institutional arrangements, the state of the formal institutions or the regulations within these ecosystems. And the second one, we focused on how entrepreneurs respond to the challenges within the institutional arrangements. So we used a multiple case studies research. So we looked at different countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So we looked at countries that are really doing well when it comes to entrepreneurship and that have progressed because it gives us a picture of where we're going in comparison to the developed countries. So we had Kenya in East Africa, Nigeria in West Africa, and South Africa, of course, in Southern Africa. So we conducted 74 interviews and also conducted some document reviews of the existing research on the ecosystem. And we had 24 interviews in Kenya, 29 in Nigeria, 21 in South Africa, and we used thematic analysis or JOIA methods to analyze these cases. So we started off with within case analysis where we provided summaries of each country in terms of the regulations and the way they've developed and how people compensate for the weaknesses within the regulations. But for the purposes of this presentation, I will not present the within case analysis, but we will look at the picture holistically. So in terms of the findings, so we have our first theme in terms of the regulations and the way they've been developed. So our data showed us that there is lack of stakeholder involvement in policy formulation. That means these policies are formulated, but significant actors, entrepreneurs are not involved in the mentors are not involved in the development of the policies. And we also have implementation inadequacies. Some policies are really excellent and brilliant, but they are not well implemented. And what was really important from our data was the lack of integration of all of those policies that have been developed, and as a result, leading to duplication of effort. So this leads us to our first theme, which is the regulatory quality inadequacies. And this is an example of a quote from one of the entrepreneurs. And the second theme is really about the state in terms of the informal institution where entrepreneurs or the actors are reported that there's perceived corruption because they'll be promised things and those things will not be delivered. Lack of transparency, so they don't know how some departments function, and they also have doubts in the actors' capability. Does government really mean well in terms of developing these interventions? Because a lot of times they are developed without the involvement of the entrepreneurs. So this led us to our second theme, which is institutional distrust. And the last theme that emerged from our findings in terms of how entrepreneurs, okay, thank you. In terms of how entrepreneurs make up for this inadequacies within the system, how they overcome the regulatory weaknesses and the institutional distrust. So they rely on their own agency. They need to work very hard and really identify opportunities and exploit them despite whatever that is happening around them. They look at the linkages or people that they already know and also rely on international organizations for support. And this leads us to the third theme, that people survive within the ecosystem because of the formation of selective multilateral linkages. So the model that we've developed from these findings is that the historical legacies, especially in the context of South Africa, will shape the regulations. And we think about the BBEE that is not really working in our context. And when there are institutional weaknesses, there is institutional distrust, which has impact on the ecosystem viability. So this results with a pessimistic response that, people don't trust governments or actors. And we have another mechanism. So despite the weaknesses in the system, so people have the restorative responses, which is absolutely important. So without these linkages that people form, so we will not survive. But with the linkages that people form, they are able to build the ecosystem to be viable. And in terms of our implications, we have realized that there are paradoxical responses to formal regulations. If they are weak, so they lead to pessimistic response where people don't trust anyone. And despite the distrust in the system, then they can be restorative linkages. And these are implications for future research. And in terms of practice, so from business practice, we need to build trust-based linkages and integrate all of them, the projects that we have on entrepreneurship, looking at the bottom-up approach. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Anna. All right, and it has come to my attention that the chat feature was off, so I apologize for that. I think we've enabled it for everyone, so feel free to use the chat if you need to. But now it looks like we are going to go into our Q&A for the Education and Youth Empowerment group, which will be Anna and Khadija. So I'm going to once again turn it over to Amy Jameson.
Hi, thank you, Justin, and thank you to the presenters, Anastasia and Khadija. We really, I learned a lot from those presentations. The first question is to Khadija. How can culture interfere with performance-based assessment? And how can students use it as a tool for motivation in language learning?
Okay, the best way for students to use performance-based assessment as tool for motivation should be initiated by the teacher. For example, it's up to the teacher to design a project that is congruent with learners' cultures and that will give them opportunities to learn English while they are doing something which is really related to their culture. For example, a best example of this will be when you're teaching English to kids in Africa. For example, you can give them a project in which you're gonna tell them to go to their grandparents or to go to their parents to learn stories and then come up and share these stories with the class. You know, while they are doing this, they are doing something which is really embedded in their culture, because storytelling is part of African culture, and learners can identify themselves with this practice, and that way they can be motivated to learn English. And it can also contextualize the processes of teaching, learning, and assessing English. So this is the hidden elements behind, you know, performance-based assessment.
Thank you, Dr. Kone. Appreciate that. Now for Dr. Mamabolo. I had a question about, you know, you've identified some breaks in the linkages between policy and entrepreneurs, the actual, you know, the policy that's overseeing the system and the practice that's actually happening on the ground. But do you have any thoughts on opportunities to fix some of those broken linkages? How do you get stakeholders, for example, to be more engaged with policymakers in that policymaking and build trust in the system? I know that's a very big question, but I was just thinking about where are some of the levers that could be pulled to kind of start to fix those breakages.
Yeah, that is really a great question, Amy. And one that even from the scholarship perspective, we don't really know how the different actors, they are enforcing institutional change. So all that we know is that they've been badly affected by the system, but in terms of how the individuals are contributing back to changing the policy, so that is still not known. So what we realized is a lot of them will just disengage from the system and exit the ecosystem and say, this is not working out, so I cannot collaborate. But what I know is that all the policies have opportunities for revision, and they have opportunities for modification. So as the different regulatory bodies go through these processes to revise, so that is where they need to engage the different stakeholders and to always keep their door open for people who have additional inputs on how the policies can be changed. But that is the biggest question that we need to solve, not only on this platform, but also from the different, you know, policy organizations that we deal with.
Perfect, thank you, Dr. Mamabolo. Now I'll turn it back to Justin for the last group of presentations.
Great, thank you, Amy, and thank you both once again. So we are on our final group. We will hear from our health and nutrition group, which is comprised of Dr. Margaret and Njoroge. Sorry, Maggie, if I mispronounced that. Dr. Regina Mayaka and Dr. Irene Segopolo. We've got, first up is Dr. Maggie Njoroge from the United States International University in Kenya. She's working in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies under Dr. Deborah Johnson. In her home institution mentor at USIU is Dr. Josephine Arasa. So Maggie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. And I need rights to share my screen, Justin.
I just quit sharing, so you should be able to now. Try again.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, colleagues from MSU, and good afternoon, Kenyans, and the entire Africa. It is nice for us to be here so that we can together look at what we have been doing for the last 1 year, say probably 10 to 11 months. My name is Margaret Njoroge. I've been introduced well from USIU, that is United States International University in Africa. And I was working on mental health conditions and risk factors among women in Garissa County in Kenya. In a form of a background, it is a global evidence that mental health is strongly determined by many factors, including sociocultural practices, economic and religious beliefs, among others. And it's also good to note that for the longest, the burden of mental disorders has been underestimated because of inadequate appreciation or probably lack of knowledge of the connectedness between mental illness and other mental conditions, and hence the first president of WHO coming up with the phrase of no health without mental health. Now, this study, we conducted it in Garissa County, and a brief background of Garissa County or the northeastern area of Kenya. Those are communities that have deeply ingrained cultural and religious traditions, and in most cases that influence and often inadvertently impede the mental health of women and girls, mainly because of the socio-cultural practices, as well as the religious beliefs and other cultural beliefs. And therefore, this research, we worked with some research questions, 3 of them. And number 1, we were looking at the prevalence of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorders among women in Garissa County. The reason why we are calling them women, it's because of the ages that I'm going to talk about later. And what are the risk factors for anxiety, depression, and PTSD, that is post-traumatic stress disorders, among these women? And of course, looking at the mental health interventions that would be suitable for the region. And the overall objective of the study was to highlight and propose culturally responsive mental health interventions targeting women and girls in that region. Again, I say that it is a region that is deeply ingrained into their cultural practices and cultural beliefs, as well as religious beliefs. And because of that, we were looking at how could we propose a mental health or mental health interventions that are culturally sensitive. The study adopted a mixed methods embedded research design to answer the research questions that I've already mentioned. And then the study participants are women, both married and unmarried, between age 18 to 39 years, as well as 20 key informants. The key informants are, of course, cut across community leaders, mental health practitioners, nurses, and community health workers, among others. And then data collection tools used were standardized tools by Kessler. That is a psychological distress scale that measures depression and anxiety, as well as the DSM-5, PCL-5 scale that measures PTSD. And then we had a focus group discussion guide for women, as well as an interview schedule for the key informants. I want to mention about the socio-demographic characteristics, and mainly it is because of looking at some of the cultural practices that are happening. And one of them is age at marriage. If you can look at this section over here, age at marriage, whereby we found that between ages 15 to 17 who are married off, there were 11 of them, and then another 11 who are married at the age of 18 to 24. The key age group that we were concerned about knowing what at what age they got married was that one of ages 15 to 17. But then when you look at circumcision, we are calling it circumcision. We had to be careful not to call it female genital mutilation, because definitely to them, they are not mutilating. What they are doing, they are practicing their culture. And therefore we called it circumcision. And at the age of circumcision, this was alarming. At the age of 5 to 12 years, 49 of the women underwent female genital circumcision, or rather, circumcision at the age, 49 of them at the age of 5 to 12, and 20 of them between the age of 13 and 17. The incidence of PTSD, and when I say PTSD, it is post-traumatic stress disorder. All the items from the tool that we were using were summed up to provide a total of 80. And then we got a cutoff of 38, which is the recommended cutoff, and whereby at 38 and above, it denoted a likelihood of PTSD. And the results indicated an alarming figure of 53% of the women that were assessed having PTSD, 53% out of the 100. And then when it came to the age distribution, it was highest, PTSD was highest at the age group of 18 to 19, as you can see in these figures over here. And then further analysis revealed that marital status was not associated with PTSD, and also age at marriage. It was amazing, or I don't know how, it did not show any significance association. We also checked the incidence of psychological distress, and in this case, we are talking about depression and anxiety. And it showed that on average, 60% of women in Garissa County presented with moderate to severe psychological distress. When you see girls over here, we are actually talking about between 18 and 49. So those ones who are like below 20, we were referring to them girls, but ideally all of them as women. So this was also alarming, having such high psychological distress levels. This is how it is put in a figurative way. And then we also wanted to check other correlations, and at that we did a cross tab of psychological distress and age, and the result showed that age group was significantly associated with the presence of psychological distress, which is also something that we actually needed to take care of, keen on. Like if you look at this, where we have moderate shows that there is something that ought to be done in terms of an intervention. And you can see that those ones are with moderate to severe, we have all these that are falling in this category.
2 minutes.
Yeah, the results further showed that marital status was not associated with psychological distress, and circumcision was also not associated with psychological distress, and therefore, but further correlation of PTSD and psychological distress using Pearson correlation indicated that severe psychological distress was highest in those with PTSD. So for those who are in my field, that shows high comorbidity. Very quickly, I want to take you through the qualitative results, whereby early marriage, poverty, female circumcision, stigma and discrimination of people with mental illness, and then cultural religious beliefs were associated to poor mental health outcomes among women. And then it also showed that those with who had undergone female genital mutilation, or rather circumcision, they had low self-esteem, they had depressive symptoms, they had sex anxiety, avoidance of reminders, and intrusive memories of the event. All these are the last two, that is the reminders as well as intrusive memories, are symptoms of PTSD. And then believes that mental health conditions are due to supernatural forces, witchcraft and curses, that is like the evil eye, and that the disease is contagious, has caused a lot of stigma, which adds to the burden of poor mental health in the region. Consequently, individuals with mental illness are neglected. Sometimes they are stoned when they are met by people on the road, they are stoned, and there is a lot of stigma. Then the mental health treatment approaches that most of these people prefer, they prefer prayers, taking them to the mosque, that is, and traditional treatment by witch doctors and traditional healers. In conclusion, we can, those who are more of this we have mentioned, but participants attributed cultural practices of early marriage and FGM, as well as those others mentioned, but mainly low mental health knowledge and stigma to poor mental health outcomes in women. So lack of low mental health knowledge, poor attitudes towards mental health conditions, as well as perception of strong relationships between beliefs and mental illness appear to have impacted mental health in the region. We recommend that culturally responsive interventions that are geared towards increasing community awareness, advocacy, and knowledge on mental health to be put in place in the area, because that would reduce stigma and improve mental health seeking behaviors. Of course, our findings are relevant to stakeholders in the region. I would wish to acknowledge the work that has the following: USIU, Michigan State University, my variable mentors, Deborah Johnson, Vicky Lawrence, as well as Josephine Nyamboke Arasa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maggie. All right, next up, we have got, let me switch screens here. Got Dr. Regina Mayaka from Edgerton University, also in Kenya. So at Michigan State, she is working in the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering under her mentor, Vanji Alasilja, and her home institution mentor is Josiah Amolo. So Regina, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Justin, for the introduction. The title of my presentation is a nanobiosensor for the rapid detection of BLA-NDM1 gene. I may like to start by mentioning that majority of us are not aware that when a person is infected by a resistant bacteria, the chances of that person dying is triple compared to when that person is infected with a non-resistant bacteria. And therefore, early detection of the pathogenic bacteria and their resistant genes is usually a crucial factor in the healthcare and the overall public health. Antimicrobial resistance, that is AMR, usually occurs when microorganisms change over time. They no longer respond to medicine, and therefore they lead to longer hospital stays, high healthcare costs, and high mortality rates. Currently, it is among the top 10 public health concerns, and this is according to WHO, killing 700,000 to around 1.2 million people yearly. And this number is estimated to rise to 10 million people, and 4.7 million of these come from Asia, 4.2 from Africa, and these are regions whereby the use of antibiotics is, that is the regulations about the use of these antibiotics are not really enforced. A New Delhi meta law, that is NDM in short, is a beta-lactamase gene that was first identified in the year 2008-2009 from a patient who had been hospitalized in New Delhi, India. And then this was isolated from strains Klebsiella pneumoniae and E. coli. Since then, it has been spreading throughout the entire Enterobacteriaceae family and also throughout the world. In fact, it is usually classified as a promiscuous gene. Another worrying concern is that it is now being found in several compartments of the environment, including the food chain, the hospital sewage, drinking tap waters, and also municipal wastewaters. The strains that express this gene are usually produce carbapenemase enzymes that hydrolyze most of the beta-lactam antibiotics, including the carbapenems, which are usually the most powerful and used as the last line resort for treating AMR infections, and therefore rendering them ineffective. Some of the drivers of AMR include the overuse and underuse of antibiotics. We have indiscriminate use of antibiotics in agriculture and veterinary care, lack of rapid diagnostic laboratory tests. We have poor hygiene and sanitation practices, and also poor infection control in hospitals and clinics. We have methods that are currently used to detect these pathogens, but then majority of them suffer from some drawbacks. For example, we have the traditional methods that are usually labor-intensive, time-consuming. They provide inaccurate and inconsistent results. The rapid methods that are available, in most cases, the equipment is costly, high maintenance costs are required, need of trained personnel. We have complex pretreatment steps and a need of a laboratory facility. And therefore, there is a need for a rapid and cost-effective method that can be applied in the resource-constrained regions. And this brings us to the research that I was doing, that is nanotechnology. This is a science or an engineering that manipulates matter at a nanoscale. So we are talking of particles of 1 to 100 nanometers. And to bring this into perspective, we take an example of a strand of hair, that is the width of hair strand, or the thickness of a sheet of paper, which is around 80,000 to 100,000 nanometers. So we are talking of very small particles. So they've been applied in the medical field for disease diagnosis, drug delivery, molecular imaging, drug screening, among others. So what is a biosensor? This is a device that converts a biological response into a signal. And it usually has 3 components. We have the analyte, which is can be a whole cell organism or the DNA of an organism. And then we have a bioreceptor, which is a biological molecule that is able to interact with the analyte. And then we have the transducer, which can be able to sense the reaction between the analyte and the bioreceptor and therefore register signal. In our research, we employed gold nanoparticles because they have been found to have very unique properties, including the fact that they are easily modified, they are stable, and they have a property that is known as localized surface plasmon resonance, of which our detection is based. So this is a phenomenon whereby surface electrons are able to interact with electromagnetic radiation, and then they kind of oscillate, and that collective oscillation is what we call localized surface plasmon resonance. And this leads to subsequent absorption of light within the UV visible band. So this property is usually dependent on the size, shape, and the interparticle distance of these nanoparticles. Here we have gold nanoparticles that are suspended in solution. And we have particles of a size between 30 and 50 nanometers. They have a wine red color, and they absorb light at around 520 nanometers. The ones on the far right, they have 90 nanometer particles, and they absorb light at around 620 nanometers. So what usually happens is that in our biosensor, we employed DNA as the analyte. Our bioreceptor was a probe or a sequence that was designed from NDM1 genome sequencing. And we also employed our transducer as gold nanoparticles, and their surface functionalized with a thioligand. So this study was designed to develop a rapid nanobiosensor for detection of NDM1 gene in clinical isolates. So this is our biosensor illustration. So after designing the probe, which is a bioreceptor,
2 minutes.
We have our DNA. You extracted this from the organisms. So we combine that in a same tube with our transducer, and then we carry out what is known as denaturation and annealing in a water bath. So what happens is that when the target DNA is present, it complementary binds with the probe, and they protect the gold nanoparticles from aggregation. So when we add the acid, the target tube, that is the tube that has got the target, will remain red, and the one that doesn't have a target will turn into blue. And subsequently, the shift of our peak will change from around 520 to 620 nanometers. So we use HCl so that it can reduce the surface charge and therefore weaken the repulsion forces and enhance aggregation. So these are the results of our biosensor. So at the middle, we have the tube that had our target DNA. And then we have the negative control that didn't have any DNA.
And then we have a non-resistant strain, DNA from a non-resistant strain. And we can see that from our visual detection, there is a change in color for the negative control and the non-target. And then our target remained red. So we had to confirm this from a nanodrop spectrophotometer. And therefore, when we look at our target, we have, the shift of the peak was not much, but then for the non-target and the negative control, the shift the peaks moved to 620 nanometers. We also employed more of the negative targets that we had in the lab, susceptible strains that we had in the lab. And from here, we can see that the red bar represents the target, and the absorbance ratio of that red bar is higher compared to absorbance ratios of the non-targets. So this biosensor can specifically detect the NDM1 gene. We also confirmed this from our spectral data. We can see that NDM, that is the target, the peak didn't really shift. The rest shifted to around 620 nanometers. We also we did diagnostic sensitivity and specificity, whereby we used 40 strains of bacteria. 35 of them were carbapenemase producing bacteria that were provided by the Michigan State University hospital. And then 5 of them were susceptible strains, 12 were NDM positive and 23 were NDM
Regina,
negative.
we're at time.
And then from this, the biosensor was able to detect 11 out of 12 NDM positive samples correctly, and it was able to differentiate 25 out of 28 NDM negative samples correctly. So the nanobiosensor can accurately differentiate between the target NDM1 gene from the non-targets. This can be applied in low resource settings because it is rapid, cost-effective, and the specificity and sensitivity is within the reliable clinical range. I acknowledge the following people I have in this slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. All right. And last on our list, but certainly not least, is Dr. Irene Segapolo from the University of Botswana. She is working in the Department of Advertising and Public Relations at Michigan State under her mentor, Dr. Teresa Maston, and her home institution mentors, Dr. Hopton Dunn. So Irene, I know I will be sharing your slides for you today. So
thank you. Thank you, Justin. Good morning to everyone. Yes, Justin, you are right. I'm last but not least. My topic for my study is Voices from Within, Advocating Communication Strategies for Female Cancer Patients, Survivors, and Caregivers in Botswana social settings. Now, I'd like to start by saying illness affects us all, and understanding the journey of diagnosis, fear, pain, and coping, and end of life is very important. And listening to stories of those affected would help us understand their situation and determine communication strategies that will be effective, communication strategies that are that would be relevant to them. Now, just a little while ago, I was watching TV, and the former president, Jimmy Carter's wife, said something interesting about how we all have been carers at one point or another, and that we still would, some are still carers, and therefore I really feel that if we all understand that illness affects us all, and that we should take great give our time to listening to those who are in situations in chronic illness like cancer, then we may be able to support them in the way that they will feel supported. Justin, can we move on to the next slide? So by way of context, I just want to mention that Botswana is a small country with a population of 2.3 million. And the cancer statistics, I just have the 2022 from Lancet Oncology, shared that approximately 2010 new cancer cases of different types and 1,112 deaths were recorded in 2020. Now, this shows how important it is to be researching on how cancer affected can be assisted. Now, in Botswana, there is medical and professional psychosocial support in treatment and care of patients and survivors. And now this comes from the report that was done last year the study was done between 20 and 2022. Can we move on to the next slide? So my topic really is on storytelling of disease or chronic illness. So I'll just touch on research on development of pathographies, which are illness stories that research is showing attention, there's a lot of attention given to social construction and lived experiences of illness perspectives. And development of research on importance of communication on patient care has been conducted in clinical settings. That is why I think and I feel this study is very important, because not much research has been done in social settings. Next slide, please. Now, the objective of the study is to explore supportive communication for cancer patients, cancer survivors, and caregivers in social context in Botswana through narratives. And my proposition that further to the objective is that we can increase the quality of life of cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers by effectively engaging in reciprocal dialogue, by listening and reading about their lived experiences through narratives. Next slide, please. Now, this I must mention from the outset for the research design that this study is explorative. And rather it's exploratory. And so what the results that I got from here are going to inform further study. And the study is on storytelling of first-hand accounts of everyday lived experiences, and the qualitative research approach I used in order to elicit qualitative data. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Now, the methods. 30 participants of all cancer types aged between 22 and 55 were interviewed through WhatsApp calls and Zoom calls. Some participants were not able to log on to Zoom, and so we did WhatsApp calls. And the reason being that I interviewed participants while here in the States, and so I needed to get in touch with them through WhatsApp or Zoom. And Justin, I can't see my thingy at the top there. But anyway, and these WhatsApp groups were snowballing was used for selecting participants for the interviews. Snowballing from 3 known WhatsApp groups in Botswana. Now, and then the analysis was done through thematic data analysis. Can we move on to the next slide? Now, the first slide shows the interrelationships that the cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers have with their significant others, that they have within their contexts as patients or as survivors or as caregivers. And then it shows that there are interactions between, or I tried to break down this to show the complex interrelationships that exist for the cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers. And this diagram, I adopted it from the socio-ecological model that because it considers complex, it considers complex interplay of complex generative relationships. And these are important to understand for important communication strategies. Next slide, please. Now, the other diagram shows the result. These are results from my exploratory study. Empathy and reciprocal empathy were the core results that came from the participants, and they said this is a much needed variable because it's all about humaneness. And then they also explained the difference between assumed empathy and received empathy, that sometimes people would think they are giving them some kind of emotional support, but they may use wrong words, they may use non-verbal expressions that they would decode as not actually showing that empathy that they require. Can we get to the next slide? And some other results I got that are related to the empathy and reciprocal empathy is that the participants indicated that it is crucial to understand that conversations should be meaningful, that, you know, for them, time is of essence. So if you give support, say for a caregiver, for example, or a significant other, and you converse with them and you try to motivate them in some way or the other, you need, using words, you need to remember that time is of essence and that whoever is interacting with them should listen carefully to what they have to say about
time.
And then that people should have effort in, we have to have concerted efforts in the search for knowledge. Let us know about the illness. If you are going to give empathy, know what you are, when you say it will be okay, what do you mean by that? The last slide, please. And then the other results on digital platforms and risks associated and management of that. The risks are about management of disclosure of personal information. Can we move on to the next slide, to the conclusions? Now, conclusions from this study are that narratives unpack taken for granted meanings in illness, fear, recovery, and hope, and that empathy and reciprocal empathy are core to the well-being and resilience of those affected, and that participatory communication within relational context is crucial for public health strategies. And so the implications are, or for the future, that there needs to be a database development for the affected so that continuous dialogue and public education is paramount or is developed, and that participatory approach for campaigns development should be applied when campaigns are designed, because the
we're at time.
empowerment of the affected goes with the adage, no research without us. Thank you for listening. The research is ongoing, and therefore I'm glad that at least I gave you a few pointers to what I have been doing this past year. My acknowledgements to Teresa Masten, who's been very supportive, Hopton Dan, AAP, my research assistants, and my peer researchers and research participants. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, and then we are at our final Q&A for the health and nutrition group. So in addition to Irene, I'll ask Maggie and Regina to please come back, and I will hand it over to Amy once again.
Hi, thank you so much for those final presentations from Maggie, Regina, and Irene. And thank you for those who've stayed with us through this whole presentation. And we're also those who would be joining us later with the recording. I'm glad that you are here, and we've learned a lot through these sessions. The first question is to Maggie. Should we then emphasize on FGM or circumcision if it does not impact mental health among the community? Oh, Maggie, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I saw the question and I responded on the Q&As.
Oh, great. Okay.
On the chat. However, for the purposes of those who did not, who are not there who did not see it, we cannot entirely say that FGM has not impacted on the women over in those areas. What is happening, and that's the reason why we had a mixed methods data collection way. It is because we are doing an assessment when on women who probably underwent the circumcision when they were like 12 years old. And at that particular time, they are maybe 20, 25, you know. So that's the reason why even as we do that, we would not be able to capture it in the quantitative with the quantitative tools. However, when it came to focus group discussions as well as the interviews, we were able to analyze that. And if you saw my slides in the qualitative section, the women or the participants talked about FGM and some of the nightmares they still experience today when they think about or when they remember or when they have memories of what happened to them. So we actually cannot say that we continue with female circumcision because it causes, it brings poor mental health outcomes. However, probably what needs to be done is to do an assessment with a quantitative assessment when they are way younger, and probably help them so that we prevent them from getting into either PTSD or getting them to a lifetime mental health conditions. So that's what I would say as far as that question is concerned.
Maggie, I have a lot more questions for you, but we can have those discussions later. I know we're running on time. Regina, turning to you, could you talk a bit about some of the challenges you had and how you overcame them, like data, duration, support, funding, etc.? Could you talk some about, when you're carrying out the research with the team, what are some?
Thank you for the question. The challenges, I can say that they're usually quite many, because when we are carrying out an experiment, sometimes it might not come out the way you want, but then you keep on doing it so that you may get the result that is consistent. You want a consistent result. And then for me, because I was moving from an area of chemistry to biology engineering, maybe I can say that took me time to really understand the area, but at the end of the day, I've been able to overcome all those challenges and come up with the results that were really required.
Great, thank you so much, Regina. And then to Irene, there's a question in the chat of, do you think that your work would be strengthened by including some quantitative data in it, or perhaps planning for a mixed method research in the near future?
Thank you for the question. It's quite significant. This part of the research, as I said, is exploratory, and that was stage one of just finding out and what the affected, the cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers lived experiences are, and that is why I use that qualitative only. But the next stage is going to involve follow-up with focus group discussions when I get back to Botswana, and also quantitative research. But I must hasten to point out that because of the nature of the illness, and because of the nature of the topic that I'm so like advocating, qualitative will be the core, because I want to get us into really understanding how we can build communication strategies that will benefit the affected. And also what's going to happen is we're going to also involve other stakeholders, not just the cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers, because there are other relevant stakeholders who will be key to giving knowledge, and them also participating in the dialogue that needs to happen. Yes, there is. I'm planning to do a multi. I'm planning to do go into it, not just to rely on the interviews. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I want to thank Dr. Njoroge, Dr. Mayaka, and Dr. Sekapolo for those presentations, and all of our African Future Scholars. I'll turn it back to you, Justin. Congratulations.
Thank you, Amy. And yes, I want to echo Amy's congratulations to everyone. We really appreciate it. Everyone did a great job. I want to turn it over to Dr. Jose Jackson-Malete to leave us with some final words as we wrap up today's session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin, for moderating this afternoon session. Wow, this has been a fantastic dissemination workshop. As usual, our scholars have really shown us the work that they've been doing over the past year. And each year we get super impressed with the work that you're doing. Together with your mentors at MSU and your home institutions, you've explored really crucial topics. This particular year, we had a whole range again, from whether it's food fortification, the nutrition sensitive agriculture stuff, trace metal analysis, climate change, heat waves, drought, language assessment and motivation, entrepreneurial ecosystems, culturally responsive mental health interventions, food safety and nanotech, and cancer communication strategies. I'm trying to just pull everybody's work in. What a broad range of topics and scholars that we have across the African continent. Most importantly, though, you've also shown, even though you've given us all the scientific and technical areas, you've also shown the broader impacts of your work, and including the policy implications in many cases. So we really appreciate the broad focus that you have put to your work over this past year. I want to just talk quickly about, I know we have run out of time, but the goal of the African Futures Program. We are trying to strengthen the research capacity of Africa's early career women researchers and support their aspirations for career advancement and to eventually become the next generation of thought leaders in Africa. And we like to think that we're making a difference, that we are planting some seeds. We've said this before, that we're planting seeds across the consortium that we hope will eventually lead to real impact on the ground. We know that bringing 10 scholars a year is just a drop in the bucket. It's many early career women and men researchers out there. But we are hoping that you guys have learned the skills of not only how to do your research and do it better perhaps, or to do it smarter perhaps, but how to better mentor those next generation of scholars out there. And so that you will then create that multiplier effect at your institutions. Our other important goal is to establish and strengthen equitable partnerships between MSU researchers and yourselves, and then also having collaboration amongst yourselves, right? And I think we've achieved many of these North-South and South-South partnerships. Over the past couple of months, we've heard about you guys writing grants together, writing papers together, and so on. And we hope that you will continue, and AP looks forward to continuing our support of these partnerships. I want to mention one thing that we hadn't really planned for in the beginning when we started this program. But as it has unfolded, the contributions that Bringing Your Families has brought to our cohort and to our community, the broader community in Michigan, has been a very positive aspect of the program. Having your children participating in the educational and cultural experiences at the Okemos public school system, I think we cannot underestimate the value to them individually, but to the school community as a whole. So in conclusion, we hope that it's clear why we are doing this, why this is such an important program for us. We hope that these collaborative partnerships can make a difference to create positive change across Africa. Scholars, it's up to you, though, in the end, to continue the commitment and to continue to build your research capacity, to continue to focus on your research, while of course focusing on your families, to continue to build this, this community of scholars, of thought leaders for the future, and that we see clearly that it's very possible, as we've heard from the work that you're all doing. So let's work hand in hand to empower communities, foster innovation, and ensure the well-being and transformation of lives in Africa. Thank you very much as well to the audience. Those of you who have stuck with us, I know we've lost quite a number of people because it was a long session, but thank you, all of you, for being here with us, and best wishes for the rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jose. So let me just conclude by saying thank you again to everyone for joining us, and reminding everyone that we will share a recording of today's session with all of the attendees soon. So please keep an eye out for that email, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.